Hi again, folks. Dr. H here. So now we're getting into a component or an element of rhythm meter types. Now, we've already talked about rhythm a little bit, but we did not discuss this fascinating subject of meter. But I think you'll be able to grasp it okay. As with all of the other elements, if you're having difficulties, please shoot me an email. I'm happy to help in any way that I can. Do remember that music is sort of a hands-on art. It's not an exact science, so there's a lot of different ways that you could apply what you're learning. And that's one of the problems that I have with teaching an online course with music. It's very difficult to apply things because I can't, you're not sitting in a classroom with pianos where you can actually apply certain things. But with respect to rhythm, it's a fairly simple concept. However, we're talking about some complexities of rhythm, such as meter types. So if you don't grasp it right away, folks, or even not at all, please don't feel defeated. Please don't feel like you've failed the course. Remember that I do grade on effort and participation. So let's take a look at meter types. Okay, folks, so now we're going to talk a little bit about meter on your online text. So if you would, once you get to the C4E site, your online text site, just go on down to the section involving rhythm and rhythm. The class 8 is what we're looking at specifically. Meter. So let's take a look at this, and we're going to talk a little bit about meter with respect to meter types. I'm going to let you read the introduction, but essentially I wanted you to be aware that meter involves something called pulse. And your text, as your text states, as you continue to listen for the pulse in music, you will begin to notice that some pulses seem stronger than others. Pulse is that driving force behind the rhythm. It's kind of like if you've ever snapped your fingers or clapped your hands or danced to music, you have been feeling that pulse, that driving pulse. This section is talking about different types of pulses or different types of meters. And so it's saying here, let's examine this with a simple series of quarter note pulses. Now, again, you can listen to all of this, but let's just sort of listen to what what your text is talking about here. So you can tell that those were unstressed pulses. Everything was given at the same rate. Now, it says here that some styles of music feature relatively unstressed pulses. For example, this Quem Quaritis Resurrexit, an example of Gregorian chant. You can listen to that if you want to, but essentially what we're trying to do is to get you to understand that pulses are how meter is organized. So let's listen. It's how it's organized into patterns. Let's listen to this pattern now. Same notes you're going to hear, but this time there's going to be stressed and unstressed. And you can see the notes here. They have markings over the ones that are stressed. That's those little hash marks there. Those little caret marks there. So essentially they're just saying stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, and that's essentially what we're talking about when we refer to pulses. Now, this is sort of something that indicates something called a duple meter. So I should also tell you that those are the two of the three basic classifications of meter: duple, triple, and quadruple. There's other classifications that we can use, groups of 5 and 6, for example, but essentially the duple, the triple, and the quadruple are the most common that you will hear. So essentially what we're saying here is that duple meter has a feeling of two pulses, or a strong and a weak pulse followed by a strong and a weak pulse. So 1, 2, 1, 2. Versus a triple meter, which is going to have three distinct pulses, and only one of those is going to be strong, strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, weak. Let's give that just a quick listen. Okay, so there's an example of duple and triple meter, and then if we look at this example of quadruple meter, you can see here there are 4 distinct pulses, groupings of 4, I should say, and this little accent mark is just saying that that pulse, the first one of each group of 4, is what is stressed. So if you see 4 pulses, that obviously is going to equate to something known as quadruple meter. Now if we go ahead to the next section, it talks about something called bar lines and measures. This is just another way that rhythm or meter is organized. You can see here these vertical lines separating this staff, if you will. It's separating the staff into measures. So like a ruler is divided into inches, music is divided into measures, and the bar line is what separates music into measures. And you can see here there's different types of bar lines. There's a repeat sign. So I encourage you to take a look at that and discover that about your on your own. Let's go on now to meter signatures. Now, sometimes meter signature, that word can be, that term rather, can be a little misleading or confusing, because you can see time signatures and you can hear the term meter signatures. Your text uses time signatures, but if you ever hear another musician talking about meter signatures, it's essentially the same thing. Time signatures are what organize individual beats into these meters. And you can see here it consists of 2 numbers, a top number and a bottom number. And essentially, in a time signature, the top number tells us the number of beats, and the bottom number tells us the duration of the beat, or the type of the beat. And so if you remember learning back in our original discussion of rhythm, we learned about note values. And so when you see something like a time signature, that top number can be any number, even or odd, but the bottom number must always be even. And that's because that bottom number represents a note value. 4 would equal a quarter note, 2 would equal a half note, right? 1 would equal a whole note, and so on. So, and you can have any combination of note values. You could have, any number of note values. For example, that top number could be anything from 1 to 1,094 if you wanted to, but the bottom number must be a note value number, such as quarter, half, 16th, eighth, or what have you. Okay, so you can see here they've given you those number values that are associated with note values. A whole note is the equivalent of a 1, half note of 2, quarter note of 4. If this seems confusing to you, think about fractions, right? 1/4 would be written 1/4, right? 1/2 could be written 1/2, and so on. So if that, hopefully that will help to clarify. They give examples here. 3/4 in 3/4 meter, the top number 3 indicates that there are 3 beats in a measure. This means that the music is in triple meter. The bottom number 4 indicates that the beat is a quarter note. So there are 3 quarter note beats per measure. If you compare that to this next time signature, 2-2, in 2-2 meter, the top number indicates there are 2 beats per measure, and that's of course duple meter. The bottom number, 2, indicates that the beat is a half note. Again, think about that fraction 1/2. You would write that 1/2. Okay, so let's move ahead and take a look at beaming. Beaming is something that happens when you have notes of shorter durational value. If you remember back in our discussion of note values, eighth notes and 16th notes, those all have little flags on the end. And what we simply do is we beam 2 or more notes together with flags. And this is always done in a certain way. It's always done by the pulse. If you remember talking about pulses, well, it says here the principal purpose of beams is to more clearly indicate the location of beats within the measure. Notice how each beamed group in the example coincides with the beginning of a beat, as illustrated by the dotted lines in the example given below. So you can see here, here's a quarter note and here's a quarter note, and they've separated the beats, right, by these dotted lines, and they're showing you that 2 quarter notes fits within, 2 eighth notes fit within the time frame of 1 quarter, or 4 16th notes fit within the time frame of 1 quarter note. It can be very confusing, but hopefully you're grasping this. Again, I encourage you to listen to the examples and also explore other music theory sites. This little example here is showing you how the music is organized, and note how it's also counting out the pulses for you. The pulses now, not the notes. Note how these 2 eighth notes would be the equivalent of 1 quarter note, and they are being played, right, on beat 1, or the first pulse, and then the second set of quarter notes would be on beat 2. You can take a look at the time signature, which is 2/4, telling us there are 2 beats per measure, and that the quarter note receives the beat. Well, if we look at this, you know, here's 2 eighths that would equal 1 quarter. Here's 2 more eighths that would equal another quarter. So sure enough, 2 quarter notes per measure. Let's listen. It doesn't give you much of an example, does it? But that is, in fact, giving you just this idea of pulse, 2 pulses per measure, 2 beats per measure, and of course that would be duple meter. If there were 4 pulses, it would be quadruple, and if it were more than that, obviously it would be more. Now this is showing you an interesting look at this piece of music by Scott Joplin. Notice how it does not have the beams connecting the notes of shorter duration, and take a look at this. That's much easier to read than this. Now you might be looking at both of them going, that doesn't look very much easier to me. Well, trust me, if you were a pianist, as I am, this is much cleaner, much easier to look at than that. Okay, moving ahead. When we talk about incomplete measures, or something called a pickup measure, or an anacrusis. These are great little terms here, so I encourage you, and if you haven't noticed this, but whenever they have a word that's important, if you click on the word, it will come up with a dictionary meaning, and sometimes that takes a little bit of time, particularly if you have a slower internet connection. Apparently my internet connection today is running extraordinarily slow. I'm not sure why it's taking so long, but anyway, hopefully it'll work better for you than it is for me. I'm not sure why the dictionary is working. If you guys are having trouble with that, please let me know, because that shouldn't take that long. But this upbeat and pickup is exactly the same. They all mean the same thing: an upbeat, pickup, or an anacrusis. And they're talking about this little section right here. These two little notes off by themselves obviously do not equate to a full measure. And you'll see that often in music. You'll see that there is something called an anacrusis. Okay, and that brings us to the quiz on meter. So hopefully you will be able to do this, and you'll be able to figure it out without too much difficulty. If you have trouble, please do email me. I'm happy to answer your questions to the best of my abilities. And once again, do check out musictheory.net.